Hello, 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 and welcome everyone to Code It Live. This is the JavaScript survey, the State of JavaScript survey release stream party. I mean, it's quite the title. It's quite the mouthful.
I think if we say it's a party, right? That's all it takes.
My name is Alyssa Nicoll. I'm a developer advocate at Progress and proud member of the JavaScript community. And with me on that side,
my introduction is going to be almost identical, actually. I am Kathryn Grayson Nanz. I'm also a developer advocate at Progress, and I am also a member of the JavaScript community, although I'm on the React side and you're on the Angular side. So it's something we've managed to overcome.
We don't fight about it. Welcome, chat. I see people popping in. It is so good to see you. We have a really jam-packed schedule tonight, so we're going to get to it. We're going to bring on our guest of honor. Where is he? There he is. Welcome, Sacha. Hi.
Hey, thanks for having me this year again.
Can you do an intro for those who are just like, who is this person? Who is this, Sacha?
Sure. So my name is Sacha Greif. I'm the creator, the maintainer of the survey, the person that gets yelled at on Twitter when people are not happy. And yeah, my job is basically to just put it together and come up with, like, finalize the outline, collect the data, and then present it in a nice way to everybody.
And how many years? What year is this? What year number?
It's the sixth year, I think. Yeah.
Nice. Sorry, didn't mean to put you on the spot. I just assumed it was like locked in, like, you know.
No, well, because it's.
Oh yeah, of course.
It's 2022, but we did the 2021 survey in 2022, so I'm really confused. So I don't really know. But
you're like, I can't do math because now we are in 2020. I gotcha.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, I am so excited. We have a ton of guests, so we're going to just welcome them on. Kathryn, did you say one by one? We're going to do one by one? Or
yeah, let's do one by one.
All right. Next up, Ryan. Hello.
Hi.
Can you introduce yourself to the fans?
Hi, my name is Ryan Carniato. I'm the author of relatively new framework from perception basis, SolidJS. Happy to be here with so many awesome people.
Awesome. Welcome.
Yeah, thanks for coming.
Next up, we have Shawn in the house.
Oh,
sorry.
Surprise.
I was just going in absolute random order. All for you. Sorry about that.
Hey everyone, I'm Shawn, also known as Swix. I did not invent a framework, which makes me an outlier. I think I drink and know things is my brand.
I love it. Love it. Welcome. You also wrote the conclusion on this year's survey.
So I did write the conclusion. Thank you.
Those who are like, Shawn sounds familiar. Go read his work. Go read his work. Next up, we're going to bring on Rich. Rich. Next up is Mark. Hi, Mark.
Hey, everybody. How you folks doing today?
This must be
good.
An absolute terrifying game to play because they can't see who's backstage. I'm the only one. So they'd have no idea what order I'm picking. I apologize, guests. I don't mean to just like absolutely put you on the spot. Mark, welcome. Can you introduce yourself for everyone here?
Yeah, friends. My name is Mark Thompson, also known as Mark Texan online. I'm a developer relations engineer at Google working on Angular, which I did not create, but I am very happy to be working on.
Hey, are we saying Ryan is solo today on the creators? The framework creators, I'm sure.
Well, if Rich can speak, he'll have something to say about that.
Oh, Rich. Wait, can you speak? Speak,
I don't know. I mean, I can speak. The question is whether you can hear me. All right. I just turned it off and on again.
Oh, well, that was super easy. Welcome, Rich. Can you do an intro for yourself?
Okay. I'm Rich. I work on Svelte. Before that, I worked on Rollup.
Very nice. Very nice. And next up, Sarah. Hello and welcome. Hi.
Hi, everyone. I'm Sarah Drazner. I've been making tools for the developer ecosystem for a long time. I used to be on Vue core team, but went into emeritus status when I took on my new job as Director of Engineering for Core Developer Web at Google, which means that I own a bunch of teams for infrastructure, including Angular, Sass, Karma, a bunch of other things you may know about, and some things you don't because they're internal to Google. But I'm very excited to be here.
Awesome. Thanks for being here. And I think our last guest for now, we might have pop-ins, surprise people. We're keeping you on your toes. Christian, hi.
Hello. Hi, everyone. My name is Christian, and I'm a senior advocate at AWS. And just like Shawn, I don't create anything. I'm currently not maintaining anything, but like I really do care about emerging market communities and generally always representing the African market.
Awesome. Awesome. I'm so excited. Yes, Ryan in the chat said it's Brady Bunch up in here. It is. It is. And I do apologize for that startling reveal for each of you. I promise in the future I'll be kinder. So thank you so much for being here. Sacha actually had many of you in mind. I was like, hey, can we get these people on? I was like, let's make it happen. So I really appreciate you being here to not only talk about the survey itself, but the community and where it's at and where we see it going. So thank you all. Oh, so Sacha, I know you had outlined a couple of things. For the first 25 minutes of the stream, we'd hoped to talk about the report itself. And I can pull it up. I don't know how small our faces will get, but I didn't know if anyone, maybe Sacha, you want to kick things off with just key insights from this year's report. Anything that you thought was interesting? You are muted, darling, and I'm going to unmute you and see if that works.
Sorry.
I think, yeah.
Yeah, I was saying you're putting me on the spot again.
Oh yeah.
You know what? If I'm totally honest, like I spend so much time working on that data. It's like when you say a word over and over and doesn't mean anything to you, and the report is the same to me. I don't even know what's interesting or not. So I'm gonna pass.
Okay, gonna pass. All right. Anybody can unmute. Oh wait, I have one more guest, and I have no idea what's gonna happen to our Brady Bunch. So everyone, prepare yourselves. Emma. Hey Emma, welcome. Can you do a quick intro for everybody?
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, can you hear me? Cool. Yeah, I missed intro, so I'm not sure what everyone else said, but I am Emma Tversky. I work on Angular's developer relations at Google, most closely with Mark, but with a lot of other people on this stream. So
welcome. So glad to have you. Okay, yes. So I was just opening the mic up for anybody who wants to speak for key insights this year into the survey. I keep saying this year. When I say that, I mean 2021, because obviously 2022's survey doesn't exist yet. So any key insights from 2021's survey? Any interesting tidbits? I can pull it up if you guys want.
I mean, I can go. I can say something that might be slightly controversial.
I love it.
And perhaps I need to be careful. But you can see in the on the front page of the libraries section, there's this chart, this sort of quadrant chart, and you can see like there's a distinct shape that some of the lines in that chart have, where they're rising and they're rising and they're rising, and then all of a sudden, like a bunch of things that are like extremely popular in the JavaScript ecosystem have sort of taken a little bit of a turn to the left. And to me, it brings to mind something that Swix wrote last year, or maybe it was 2 years ago, depending on how prescient he was, called the Third Age of JavaScript. And it kind of feels like we are possibly on the verge of a little bit of a tipping point, and a lot of the tools that we have taken for granted are now being supplanted by newer alternatives like Veep, for example, which did incredibly well this year.
Yeah, actually, you just stole my next blog post idea, because I noticed that as well. And I'm not sure if I was thinking of it as the Nike curve, because it kind of looks like a Nike.
Yeah, Kathryn, I know you had it earlier, or at least I think that's what, is this what you're talking about, where it's swooshing?
Yeah, but it looks funky to me. Like, are you guys seeing it like kind of teal colored as well? Because that's definitely not the color that the website is.
Oh, no, it is.
Oh, it looks normal to y'all?
Yeah, it looks normal.
Oh, weird.
I'm really curious to know what others think about it. I also think it might be just when a library gets kind of confronted with the real world and kind of has to address all the edge cases and the annoying things that pop up. And, you know, maybe like the honeymoon period is a little bit over. So that might explain why really popular things kind of get a slightly more negative impression over a long period of time. But yeah, I'm really curious to know what everybody thinks.
Yeah, I want to expand on that because I think it's a really good point. I think when we see anything become popular over time, and we also see it go, I mean, that is the pattern that all of them go like this over time. And I think some of that has to do with, there's a big difference between building a tutorial or like playing with something on a side project and having to use it in real world use cases and hitting all the edges of it and having to deal with scale. So I do think that there's some, you know, pieces of that. I don't think that Rich is wrong though. I think that there's a lot of really interesting and exciting things happening in the ecosystem. We've seen several waves of JavaScript frameworks happen before, right? There was that first version with Knockout and Ember and things, and then we went into the second version with Vue, React, and things. And I think we are seeing Solid come out really strong here, like major props to Ryan. I think the Angular team talks about Solid a lot as like, wow, this is super cool. I do think that frameworks kind of learn from each other. Svelte, of course, is like one of the, you know, things that I'm a huge fangirl for. So no, definitely not saying that there's not huge innovation in the area. But I do think that there tends to be this kind of drop for anything that gains popularity. So there might be something there in terms of exploration.
Yeah, I was gonna say, as someone on the like positive end of it right now, having been kind of like the newest player, I definitely can feel that. But you switch to the next graph, and then you like go usage 2%, and you're like, okay, you know, you've put things in perspective, you know, where they come up. For me though, what's interesting and what's awesome is this has been going on for what, this survey 6 years. We said at the beginning here. You could see historical data coming up now is very different than coming up 6 years ago. Like I'm not sure like how much we can like pull from the data from that sense, because you know there's a lot of like mind share kind of thinking going into this. But if you look at the way frameworks rose up before versus the way, you know, almost like to saturation point right now, the way certain tools are coming up now, like if you look at like usage stats and stuff, it's really interesting that you know, historically things would go up really quickly and then kind of level off on usage and with nominal changes year over year. And I mean, from that perspective, you know, maybe it's more difficult to get into stuff now. I mean, I gotta give major props to Svelte here. When you look at the only framework in the last 2 years to go up usage by more than 5%. You know, obviously being on the slightly newer side of the chart helps, but still, like, that kind of growth is not guaranteed, and to keep that satisfaction while doing that is incredible, right? So I think there's like I think we're in like a different phase, whether that's the third age of JavaScript coming out or whatnot. Things are very different maturity-wise, perhaps, where our tools are sitting now than they were, say, in 2016, when Angular 2 or maybe even Vue to a certain degree were kind of coming up into this zone. So yeah, it's kind of a different world, but yeah, I don't know.
I love it. And I completely agree. I think I'm actually really, really interested to see just what data looks like as you zoom out in time. So, but I was wondering, this intros took way longer than I planned, so we can go over a little bit. But did anybody else have any other special insights this year? It doesn't have to be from like the intro, the survey, or libraries even. It can be from any part.
Well, let me take the opportunity to give Ryan a big virtual high five on an absolutely stonking debut. It was a very impressive result and extremely well earned. And you know, it's nice to have competition in the 90% range. So thanks for making it a little less lonely. But yes, like absolutely what you said is true. You know, the cost of having satisfied users is that you will eventually have dissatisfied users, and so that is probably the fate that awaits all of us. Although I will say that in some other sections of the survey, not the front end frameworks but other sections, you really do see that there is incredible longevity to some of these things, and trends don't change quite as quickly as people popularly imagine in the JavaScript world. You know, Browserify and Gulp still have humongous usage and awareness. And like they're not like even actively developed anymore, and they're not things that people talk about. So I don't think that we're quite as flitty and hype driven as people often like to make out.
I've been recently getting into .NET, and I think people have that mentality just because things have been like in other frameworks and other companies, things have been around for so much longer. But I think I agree with you there. I think we're not there anymore. And chat, I love you. Thank you for all of the love. Dave was saying, this feels like the Olympic coverage when Rich speaks, but instead of narrating a sporting event, it's the JavaScript ecosystem. Yeah, completely. I love it. I think you might have a future in that if that is, in fact, a thing, Rich. So
yeah, if this whole JavaScript thing doesn't pan out for you, there's always the Olympics.
We probably have more viewers right now than the actual Olympics.
Womp womp. Oh goodness. All right, I'm going to move us on to our second speaking point of the matter, and this was something Sacha was really interested in. What is it like for a library maintainer when the survey comes out? Anybody? Nobody? I mean, I know we have 2-ish people who have library maintained professionally, but you don't have the answer.
Maybe I can explain why I was curious about it. It's because obviously if you have a really good score or something like that, it's gratifying and it must be nice. But there's also the other side of the coin. And I know some projects, I'm not going to name names, but they kind of get mad at the survey because they don't do as well as they would like to. And, you know, it's always a struggle for me because I don't want to create any negativity. So I'm like, do I remove those projects altogether or do I keep them in even though I know people are not going to say they're that satisfied? And it was an issue with Angular, actually, because in past surveys, there was this confusion between AngularJS and the new regular Angular. And so, you know, I really wanted to, I didn't want to artificially like hold down the satisfaction score of Angular by mixing in AngularJS respondents. So we made that really clear when you actually take the survey. But other frameworks, they might not have this kind of, you know, relaunch. So are the scores going to be affected by people who used the framework like 5 years ago and had a bad experience then, even if it's completely new now? So these are all things that I kind of need to weigh and take into account. And I'm curious if you're a library maintainer, like how you feel about all that.
I do think that Evan, you brought up some really good points when he was talking about the relative popularity of Vite and how it took over the survey. I don't know if you've seen this thread, but if you haven't seen it, you should look it up. How Vite kind of took over the awards and did so well and things, but that he's still kind of, and I'm paraphrasing Evan, I apologize to you if you're watching, that he's still kind of suspect of some of the results because of the kind of the distinction between newer technologies and older technologies, and also the survey respondents in general. Like if we can't lose sight of the fact that the survey is going out to a particular amount of people, group of people who are more on Twitter, people who might be in more spaces than others. And so I think that that's always going to be true of every survey, right? That's true of Stack Overflow survey. That's true of any kind of data analysis. It doesn't mean that we shouldn't do it. It just means that there are a number of things to take into consideration. I think as like a data visualization person, I would say it's hard to do data visualization for things like this, but I do notice in the graphs, sometimes something will go up and it will still look like the line goes down, because we're trying to fit so much information and the space has a lot in there. And so there might be different iterations where we can make that more clear when things go up and down.
Yeah, I think we'll tweak that next year, like the rankings chart. You know, it's a chart that gets shared a lot and that people really like, but over time I've realized I think people might not really interpret it the right way and kind of misread it. So even though, you know, it's popular but misread, so it's probably not a great combination. And we're going to find a way to make it clearer, maybe keep the rankings but not over time, so you don't have that problem of like seeing trends that aren't really there. And then maybe replace that by a line chart where you can actually see if a line goes up, it really means the numbers went up as well.
And
So
just
that's definitely
shout out to you, Sacha, for putting this together and making all of these beautiful visualizations and allowing us to. So I don't mean to be too overly critical. If we're talking about analysis, that would be an analysis factor. But like, I also think that you do a massive amount of work for the community, and I'm sorry that you sometimes get yelled at on Twitter.
Yeah, to be clear, like all the data is like out there and downloadable, and so people could actually do alternative visualizations, which would probably help Sacha a lot by saying like, hey, like I did your job better for you, and then everyone agrees, and and now we can take that forward. And just to be clear, like that's the other thing I appreciate as well. Like this survey, like I don't think you get this in other languages. I could be wrong. I've definitely got a JavaScript bias, but the amount of data that's been collected for this long, I think, is unique and special, and basically only exists because of Sacha.
Yeah, I'd love to jump in. So first, Sacha and team, I want to say fantastic job on this. I know it's a lot of work, and I know it's really hard being the recipient of lots of opinions, lots of feedback. As I'm about to give my opinion and my feedback, but I acknowledge that it is tough being in that position. But I'd love to hear from you actually, just thinking about looking at the demographics, right? So what are the plans to help spread this survey out to collect more data from just different groups? And I'm thinking not only, racial or ethnic groups, but what about like age groups, for example? A big part of the people that are surveyed, or at least responded, a big part of the respondents are from the ages 24 to 34. But then you see 5 to 10 years experience being like the common experience level. So that, that's really interesting to see like that age range, because then that says somebody who was like work experience at 14, potentially in that range, and then somebody like on the upper end. But I'm just really interested in understanding like, how do we get this survey to not have 54% male respondents and then like a sliver of that be female respondents? How do we get it from, in other areas like that? So to diversify the number of people taking this survey and the types of people from different demographics. What are you folks thinking about that?
Yeah, so should we move on to like part 2? Because this is actually exactly the topic that we wanted to.
No, and I love it. I think it was a beautiful segue, right on time. Yeah. So thank you for that, Mark. Sacha, what I find admirable is how he, just talking to him and getting to know him. Sorry, Kathryn. Talking to him and getting to know him, I just admire this, that anytime he gets criticism publicly, will just immediately be like, how do we fix this? Like, it's not my reaction. My reaction is usually like tears and sobbing and like everyone hates me. But I don't know. I don't know if it's just because you've been in the public eye longer than me or what, but I really do love how you handle that. And there was a lot of criticism, especially around diversity in the survey. And so that was something Sacha really, really wanted to talk about. Not only why we think that is, but also if we think that's representative of our community, like, or maybe it's even smaller than what the community is, and how we can fix not only the survey, but the community. So I'm just going to leave the floor open, and I would love to talk about that with you all. And I do know some of you have to drop. So if at any point anybody has to go, just wave and we'll blow you kisses. But yeah, let's talk diversity in the community.
Actually, this might be before we launch in. I know we have one guest waiting in the wings.
Oh, do we? Yay! Let's bring us.
So let me add real quick, Justin, if you could go ahead and introduce yourself. We're so glad that you're here. Thank you for being patient.
What's up, everybody? It's your boy, Justin, aka I Doug the Bugger. I'm the founder and the CEO of a Render Atlanta conference that happens in Atlanta, Georgia.
Welcome, welcome. So glad to have you on. You are just in time for our diversity section of the stream. Amazing. So yes, opening the floor.
Yeah, so maybe I can just answer, give one answer really quickly to the points that Mark brought up. So, you know, it's really hard because, so you talked about outreach to different age groups, experience levels. Some people are asking about, what about, more corporate users of JavaScript who are still using older frameworks. Of course, there's different countries, different languages, different races, different genders. So there's really a lot of different communities, and it's a tough job to make sure everybody is fairly represented. So I kind of, I think that there's a naive approach where it's like, okay, I'll just contact organization X and they're gonna ask all their members to pitch in and to take a survey. And that's super important, but I think it has its limits. And from talking with other survey maintainers, they also haven't necessarily seen great results from that. And just because people are busy, so I think it's always tough when you ask the people who are underrepresented to kind of step up and do extra work to fix that. So that's definitely one branch I want to explore, but then I have other ideas. One of which is just to make the survey easier to fill out for everybody. So don't require an email, don't require creating a user account, make it shorter, make it just even improving the performance and accessibility of the app that you use to take the survey. And I think things like these will help everybody, but also especially the people who might not feel as invested, because I think all of us who are super invested in the JavaScript ecosystem, and we'll take the time to fill out the survey, even if it crashes, even if it's slow, even if you need to create a user account. But then there's people who don't feel that same involvement yet, for whatever reason, maybe because we as a community haven't done a good enough job of making them feel involved. And so they're not gonna spend that time of their day to participate.
Yeah.
And then the last thing, I forgot my last point, so maybe that's good enough for now.
Another thing, it's interesting. A fact I've learned is that 75% of engineers always tell us that they don't have enough time outside of the workday to participate in extra surveys or anything extracurricular in terms of being in tech. So when it comes to us trying to get them to participate in these things, we need to kind of meet them where they are at. And the easiest way to meet them where they are at is doing things like you talked about, how maybe we reach out to these ecosystems, such as at the conference or at these other meetups, and have that as a game or have that as some kind of a prize that if you participate in the survey, then you could win a prize or win some kind of thing to where you feel validated for expressing your own opinion. So I can't tell you the last time that I've completed a survey, even at like a Popeyes, because I'm just like, look, I don't got time to be trying to call in, you know what I mean? But if they say, hey, you might get an extra piece of chicken, or you might get some extra food, I'm all down for that. And I'm speaking about Popeyes, I just had some, so it's on my mind right now. But the point is that we have to meet people where they are at, and us trying to meet them sometimes require us using a financial incentive to actually get them to do what we want them to do.
Yeah, and it's a little bit tricky with a survey like this one, because you don't want to provide the wrong incentive, right, and have people kind of answer gibberish just to get to the prize at the end. But there's definitely things we could do in that direction, partnerships, and yeah, I think so. I think basically what I learned over the years is, initially my position was like, well, it's an open survey, anybody can take it, so it's not really my job to make sure that this person or that person, that community takes their survey. But I've realized, there's you need time, you need free time, you need you need to be able to take the survey in the first place, and that's not really, like you said, we should make an effort to meet people where they are, rather than kind of criticize them for not meeting us where we are, because that's not going to be a very productive approach, and it's not really fair in the first place.
And so even a quick way would just be us working with the employers too. If we reach out to these employers and say, hey, we want to just get a peek at what your engineers are thinking right now, so that then we could help you course correct, or we could help you provide some kind of improvement plan so that your engineers feel like they're always up to par, that's also a way in there too.
Yeah, I was curious though, do you all think that the JavaScript survey is, I know it is lacking in diversity. Do you believe that that lack matches the lack in our community?
Absolutely.
Or do you think that it is maybe more like even extreme?
I think yes and no. I mean, when I look at GitHub and some of this, some of the work that they've done to kind of understand the communities that are collaborating and working in tech, and Christian Nwamba can speak to this much better than I can, but Nigeria is one of the hotbeds of tech culture right now. You can see a huge amount of growth in that area, and I didn't see very many respondents from African areas and some other areas like Eastern Bloc, which Eastern Bloc also has a ton of developers. So I wonder if it is getting shared out enough.
Yeah, I was going to ask, when you take a look at the results, when you compare the people that took this survey versus the people that didn't, do you have a very significant is there like an obvious, we have fewer people taking this survey than expected, or is it diverse people are not taking this survey, but like people of diverse are not taking this survey, but then the rest of the community is taking this survey? Because that would help at least everyone here make more sense of what's going on. Because I can definitely say that, just like Sarah mentioned, that diverse communities are make the top 10 list of fastest growing communities when it comes to GitHub surveys. So, which basically means that you have beginners in this market, and these beginners are usually the ones who are more excited to tell you about what they've been learning. So there's definitely a disconnect somewhere, and either it's how we're creating awareness about this survey or how we're reaching these people. But I'm very sure that these are the emerging markets and people that will give you a lot of my expectation would be that they would match the same numbers we see when it comes to okay, what's the fastest growing ecosystem and stuff like that.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have data on that specifically, but just my subjective feeling is that the survey, people who take the survey are basically early adopters, people who are really plugged into that Twitter community, that Reddit JavaScript community, Hacker News maybe, and people who are outside that, I think on some level they feel like they're outsiders, and maybe they don't feel like the survey is for them. And I live in Japan, and when I look at when I type State of JS on Twitter, there's almost half of the tweets are in Japanese, because the survey is very popular here. On the other hand, almost nobody in Japan actually takes the survey, so it means people look at the results but somehow don't feel like they have they're able to take it. Maybe they don't know it's in their language. Maybe they think it's like a US only survey and it's not for them. So I really feel there's something there where even though some people are aware of the survey, they don't feel that ownership that, and
this is where Justin's point about incentives is so important, right? And I know it feels a little bit grubby to add a financial incentive to completing a survey, but this is something that the survey industry does all the time. This is how the survey industry gets people to complete surveys. So it's not like an aberration. This is just a standard practice. And you have to consider what the incentives are for people to fill out the survey at the moment in the absence of any kind of financial incentives. And I suspect that the incentive for a lot of people, and I'm kind of arguing against my own interests here, but the incentive for a lot of people to fill out a survey is because they want to represent their subculture within JavaScript. Like they want to give props to the frameworks and the tools that they enjoy using. And so that's why you have this phenomenon where relatively non-mainstream frameworks do very well, and State of JS gets this hype label attached to it because you do get these early adopters who are filling it out because they want to represent their tribe. And I think if you did consider adding some kind of a prize mechanism, or you could get a subscription to some kind of front-end masters or something like that off the back of filling out a survey, then you are going to get much higher participation from a much broader range of people.
Yeah, we did something like that for Concatenate, but then it wasn't a survey, it was a quiz. Like at the end of the conference, we asked a few questions, and people who answered correctly got egghead subscriptions. And people, like the whole list of attendees, part of that quiz. So I completely agree with Justin and Richard that I don't know if that's correct pronunciation, but yeah, it's incentives are not going. I don't think they're going to be abused if people generally, like if you've seen the arguments on Twitter about very, very silly things on things like TypeScript, there's no TypeScript and Tailwind and stuff like that. So people generally would like if the problem is initiating, it's not taking the survey. If they start it, they're going to tell you their opinion about it. They're not going to just abuse the questions so they can get to the prize. They would, once they start it, they're going to be like, oh, okay, I care about
I think Christian froze, and Mark, you were raising your hand. I didn't know if you had a point to add on top of that.
Well, I want to jump in because earlier Sacha mentioned about the responsibility of getting out in front of other people. So that's a really interesting question to think about. Whose responsibility is it? And I think what we have to ask ourselves is this survey data used to make any decisions? Is there any collateral associated with the survey data? Will I go to Sarah and be like, hey, listen, look at the state of JS. This is what it says about Vite and Vue. So we should use Vite and Vue. Right, like we should increase adoption because of what it says on this data. So I think we have to ask ourselves, in the industry, is this data being used as like social proof almost for the use of a framework? I mean, even when we opened up, right, we were virtually high-fiving people because of what went on with the survey, right? You ranked high, so here's a high five for that. So it does have some weight. So if that's the case, I do think that it's appropriate to ask ourselves, yeah, it is our responsibility to make sure that diverse groups are part of the respondent group. Incentivization is totally industry standard. One of my early engineering jobs, I worked for a nonprofit who collected government on behalf of data they collected data on behalf of the government, and they would offer gift cards to respondents, right? So this is a real thing that's not even oh, this is kind of grimy, I don't know if we should do this. Like someone already said, this is how the survey industry, gets respondents. If you've ever been stopped in the mall, they'll say, hey, I'll give you a $10 gift card to the food court if you fill out this survey, right? So, but either way, I think my bigger point is the responsibility, should be taken seriously if we're going to say that the results and the data from the survey are going to be used to influence decisions, to influence other developers, to influence communities, then I think that it's fair to say, yeah, it is the responsibility of the survey maintainers to start thinking about how to get the survey into diverse groups, more representative of the engineering community in general.
I was just going to also mention too, one of the things that I've seen done is regarding COVID and the vaccinations, where people had to be offered financial or some kind of benefit to go get the COVID vaccination. I mean, that's just the honest truth about it, is some people didn't care until it was involving them either getting some kind of benefit for them to go out there and get the vaccine. So that same exact mindset applies here, where people don't really care until it's a thing that's going to either benefit them or it's going to harm them. And if it isn't falling anywhere, it's going to fall in the middle territory, which is the gray area, where I'm only going to do it because I care, which is kind of hard to, find. So.
Something that I think is interesting, and sorry, there's feedback. Yeah, something that I think is interesting, and maybe I'm realizing, and this is a great discussion, is I have a little bit of a different interpretation of the results, is that I looked at a lot of these diversity and demographic statistics as results in themselves, right? not like what can we do as a survey and as like survey methodology to reach these different people, but like this is an honest representation in some ways of like who is the most active on tech Twitter, like who are the most involved and feel the most plugged in and identify as like tech community. And maybe I think what this discussion is sort of framing is like, we don't feel this is representative, or there are ways to reach people who maybe don't feel represented by those groups. But I think like their results in themselves of like, who are people following? I know I had like maybe some sassy tweets on this, but you can tell from their responses that like Sarah Drasner and Cassidy are like the two women on those lists shouted out. And like at no point did I mean to tokenize them, but like that represents where people are consuming their information or who does feel plugged in. And I think something else interesting mentioned at the beginning of this stream is we have historical data for 6 years, and there's a lot of it. And so I started pulling it up, and you can see that the numbers in both people of color and women decrease, right? It goes from, I just did the last 3 years, but it goes from 6% in 2019 to 5 point something in 2020 to 4 point something of women respondents in 2021. So there are historical trends that like, if we're not changing the methodologies, like these are results in themselves, I guess is my point. And it does show what the people that are the most plugged in feel attuned to and who they represent. And I think, again, some of my like sassy responses on Twitter were like maybe seen as attacking the survey and the survey's methodology, but I think it's more interestingly like we have data on who feels like they're part of tech communities right now, and what can we as tech communities, regardless of the survey, which is great, and again, if it impacts decisions, we should change these things. But like, how can we make other people who are not represented by the survey feel like they are represented by tech communities? So, yeah.
Yeah, I think you make a really great point. And what I've come to realize is there's not like one tech community. Like there's the tech community as represented by the survey. That might be accurate for, you know, the very plugged in online early adopter tech community. But then, you know, there's people in India, China, Nigeria, all over the world. And those people also deserve a voice. So to me, that's why the conversation about being representative it's kind of meaningless in a way, because representative of what, you know, who is even a JavaScript developer? Because some people just write, you know, static sites and then they'll add one line of jQuery to make the logo move or something, and then people write entire full stack apps in JavaScript. So I don't want to, you know, obviously I don't want to do any gatekeeping and being in the position of deciding who is a real JavaScript developer or not, and who is represented or not. So that's why it's more like, okay, let's just try to involve as many people as we can and not really care. I don't even really care about the numbers, to be honest. You know, what I care is looking from one year to the next, like where was I able to kind of reach out to more people, make new connections, try new things, and then see how it goes from there. And then one thing I want to say also is there's kind of the input side of things where we want to involve more communities and more people, but then there's also the output. And what I mean by that is, even if only like X% of people are, let's say, women, we can highlight those responses. And that's something I've been trying to do with like giving people the ability to customize the charts and filter them. And I want to make that much easier in the future. But I think that's already something that can be useful, because when you make those decisions, if you want to cover all bases, then you have the ability to say, okay, this is what the tech community that fills out the survey thinks, but then what do women or, you know, Black people or whoever think about tech? And so for me, both are important, right? Being inclusive on the input side, but also highlighting those minoritized communities.
I think the other elephant in the room too is that the survey is the unfortunate true reflection of what the industry looks like right now. Meaning there is a lot more work that needs to be done to get the industry to be a reflection of how it needs to look to bring together the entire world. I don't think anybody's really talking about that, where yes, there is a lack of women in the technology workforce, especially when it comes to coding. Yes, there is a lack of Black people in the technology workforce, especially when it comes to coding too. And the survey only exemplified that. Now is out there, So if we really want to see how things have improving year over year, I think the survey would be a good benchmark that could then give us a kind of a glimpse into seeing how things are starting to trend, But even if we were to get every single Black person and every single woman to actually reply to this survey, it would still be a horrible result in the end. And that's the real elephant here, is that the industry as a whole needs to improve. And if the industry improves as a whole, then the entire survey will improve. Then it'll get into the hands of everybody else.
Sure, yeah. I think that's my point, is if we use these demographics as results in themselves, I think the thesis I took from it is it shows that there's a circle, right, of like essentially white men creating great content who fully deserve to be shouted out, then being consumed by a majority of white male developers. And I think that until you break that cycle at every point, including survey methodology, but also many other points in the funnel, I think that was what I saw in those areas of the demographics. And I think that was really interesting, and more indicative of the communities we live in as a whole. But yeah.
Well, I really thought there was a good discussion about diversity, not only in the survey, but in our community. And I really want to keep it going. I actually saw quite a few great chats. And I'm sorry, chat, that I usually try to pull you in more often, but there's so many guests on today. But I really do love the suggestions that everybody had, and know that you were seen and heard. But I think it's something that we do need to still work towards in both places. So I wanted to pull up Dave D, not David, his comment. Can we focus more on technical results? I was really hoping to hear some interpretations of the frameworks and build tools, expectations of continued trends, etc. So I know we have gone over a little bit on time for our diversity section, which I think is perfectly fine. If at any point our guests have to go, you hop off. Much love and appreciation for your time. But we're going to do a wrap-up section here where I know, Sasha, you had wanted to do a speed round of maybe things to come, but maybe we could also touch on what Dave was hoping to see, if anybody else had any comments about the technical feedback from the survey this year. So the floor is yours.
That is a resounding silence.
I know.
That was impressive.
I wouldn't say resounding. I think you need a couple more seconds for it to hit resounding.
Yeah. But just maybe affecting.
Yeah.
Maybe I'll kick us off with just a thought. And you all can tell me I'm wrong or not, which is fun. I'm always really interested when I see both the state of JavaScript, and also we talked about it a little bit when we looked at the state of CSS results, the huge difference between interest and awareness and usage in a bunch of these frameworks, because we tend to see things that are really popular and really up and coming. They get a lot of talk and they get a lot of hype. We touched on like the hype machine earlier that the State of JS can create. But when we actually look at the tools that developers are using, they're not always the same. We had a good laugh at the State of CSS one, because as much as nobody felt excited or happy about, I think it was Bootstrap, it was used everywhere. And then I think we see it, Angular is the one that I think stands out to me, where you hear a lot of people that like to throw a lot of shade at Angular, but Angular's doing really well. Angular's highly used, Angular's overall pretty well liked by the people who use it. So yeah, like I would say props to Angular. Is that a React joke? Props, but But I would.
Oh, it
I'm
just got
interested.
so nerdy. I love it. I don't know why you're all not on the floor. That was hilarious. Okay.
It was awful. Don't patronize me. But I always find that one interesting, and I'm curious if there was anything else that stood out to you as something that maybe you were expecting to see and didn't, or things where you saw a discrepancy.
Well, I can say people seem to be really hooked by Angular.
Oh, you and the comments together. Yeah.
Oh man.
So I want to jump in with something I noticed in the library tier list. One thing I found to be very interesting was capacitors ranking as an A tier, but then Ionic is the C tier, since those tools come from the same company. And they get, you know what I mean? They get like similar love, and one fuels the other in a lot of ways. So that was just really interesting to see how capacitor itself, just as a way to wrap up your web app into a mobile app that can be deployed via an app store. It was just very interesting to see it that way, and then see Ionic down in the C tier. So I wish that there was some way we could find a response and be like, hey, why did you say that? Like, what was the delta between the two tools that would separate them so much when I see them usually there's like a pair that go together? But it's just interesting to me.
Well, yeah, it's also dependent on the way the questions are phrased, because we ask people if they've used something and they would use it again or would not use it again. So, if Ionic has a much larger user base than Capacitor, maybe there's also more people who wouldn't use it again. And then Capacitor is much smaller because it's newer, maybe. So that's why there's a higher percentage of satisfied users. And yeah, I mean, none of these metrics are perfect, but it's the closest we found to kind of approximate what people think. But sometimes it does lead, and I think that's what Evan on Twitter was pointing out. It does lead to maybe not misleading, but like results that can be interpreted in different ways. And I guess it's our job to clarify that.
I think like one of the sharp turns that we've all seen, I'll just call out because I think it's worth mentioning, is the Vite one. I mean, we saw it win multiple awards. Evan obviously worked a lot, and also the Vite core team worked a lot on it in the past few years, but like sharp uptick, sharp interest, sharp usage. And I think it's a really impressive tool for the amount of time that it was worked on. SolidJS, of course, Ryan's coming on the scene with that. And also the thing that's not expressed in the survey, which doesn't need to be expressed, no criticism here, but is like how much it's influenced the industry too. I think that's harder to measure. Some of the decisions and kind of technical direction that SolidJS has taken has really inspired a lot of people in the community. Same with Svelte. And then lastly, I was very surprised to not see Redux in answers around libraries aside from like the other libraries category. It does feel like Redux was so widely used back just even a few years ago, and I think it is still widely used, but I'm just talking about things that I think are like really big deviations that I saw from major trends.
I just want to comment on that. I think it's because we all finally accepted the fact that Redux is completely bloated, meaning you have a lot of setup time, and don't anybody got time to do that, So even at my job now, anytime we go to use like anything close to Redux, we always think about like, man, do we really want to go through all that work to do one easy thing? You know what I mean? So
I have to ask, for Mark Erickson's sake, have you tried Remix Toolkit? Just throwing that out there.
Have not tried that.
Okay, just wanted to put that out there because that's his first response to anyone who says that. I just sorry.
But like in the comments they were talking about context, and I just use context for a ton of things now. You know what I mean? So I feel like, of course, everything has its use cases, but anytime I hear I got to do Redux, I'm like, all right, give me a day and give me a Tylenol, and I'll be on that. So.
I'm trying to find it in the actual survey so I can show it, but I feel like there was a really interesting situation or a question that was talking about that situation of how developers will assess libraries to include and what they're looking at. And it kind of, if I remember correctly, it was one of those bracket ones that put together like documentation and usability. And it's interesting to hear you kind of talk about going through that same process to choose things here. I was trying to find it so that we could take a look at it, and I have lost it.
It can be overwhelming when you're like, I know this data point is here.
I know this exists. I looked at
I just
it.
pasted it in the chat.
Oh, nice. Okay.
Thank you. Yes. You're my hero. Yeah, there it is. Library evaluation rankings, starting with documentation and then developer experience, which I would say falls into that day in a Tylenol category.
Yeah, I mean, I would also say what Ryan said is right about Mark Erickson's work on Redux. That was definitely not meant to be like a slight to him. I'm a big fan of Mark Erickson. He does an amazing job. I think hooks have changed the game for React a little bit. That is
a lot.
What I meant.
Hugely.
Well, I think this is a case where you have like one team or one way of doing things for Redux that, you know, how it was done like a couple years back, and then somebody new comes in and adopts a new approach. But I don't know how to capture that in the survey, to be totally honest, because it's still the same name, it's still Redux. So how do you tell people, okay, what do you think about Redux, but not the old Redux, like the new Redux? And that's why I encourage people to just pick a new name. You know, if you're gonna change what you do, just call it, you know, something totally different and rebrand and have a big 2.0 launch thing, and then at least there's no confusion anymore.
I'm laughing, Sasha, because I feel like I know a team that faced that directly. I don't know what the team name is, but I might have. I think I know a team that faced that problem.
Could we also add to the 2022/3 survey of how many Tylenols do you rank this? Right here? Is it 5 Tylenols, 6 Tylenols? Like how many is it?
I like the Tylenol measurement a lot. That hits close to home.
I think it's interesting to see how much Express fell back this year, regardless of the fact that it's backing or being or inspires most of the things that are overtaking it. So, like for example, like the Next API is basically like inspired by Express functions, but like Express keeps going back, and then it's kind of like making way for other things to sit on its shoulder and grow without taking much space, which is really cool to see.
I'm going to throw a question from the chat in. Terrence is asking why we don't have a separate, I would assume a separate section for state management tools, because I know some of that, we see some state management stuff that's gotten lumped into like just general libraries and tools stuff. But is it worthwhile to think about separating out state management, and was there an intentional decision there?
Yeah, so basically a lot of state management tools are very React focused. So, you know, even though you know, Redux can be used with other libraries, as far as I know, it's still in majority used in React apps. And well, one, we didn't want to make the survey too focused on one specific library. And also we wanted to make space for other new categories like monorepo tools, for example. That's new.
That's true.
And eventually I'm hoping to do actually like a state of React survey, or maybe a state of GraphQL survey, where we could really have, you know, have enough space to really talk about state management, the data layer, data loading, all those things. But actually,
I'm biased, but I would love a state of React survey.
Yeah.
I would eat that up with a spoon. That would be super interesting to see.
Yeah, I mean,
I was thinking that was going to, like, if for state management though, like if we did just React, it's going to be too niche to describe what describe the whole entire state of state management. So, and like I know people can be biased towards choosing something like Vue because, okay, I prefer how Vue manages state. versus deal with it. So like, yeah.
I think that's part of the difference, right? Because like at least some of the reactive libraries, Vue comes to mind, Svelte comes to mind. A lot of those state management things are almost built in because like that is how the change management happens in the framework itself. Whereas like React architecture made it like a different concept or a different like thing that you'd have to pull in. So that's probably the biggest difference and probably why it's kind of difficult to have a wider comparison for that.
I mean, yes and no. I mean, like Vue still uses things like Vuex, and you're right, Composition API also creates some state management, and then there's Pina if you're looking for something smaller. So we still have some concept of state management, but I think you're also talking about like state management and change management, in which case where like we wouldn't use MobX, for instance, because it's built in to Vue. It does become really framework dependent. You can use Redux with Vue, but not many people do. So then every framework kind of has its own state management solution and also change management solutions where like they're either together or they're separated. To Sasha's point, it does become like kind of siloed in a way of like, you're not going to use NGRX with Vue probably or something like that. So I agree with you.
Yep. A couple comments. Some people really excited about the addition of the mono repos, and then a handful of +1s to State of React. Just saying.
People were getting funny. Yeah, that regular that I giggled. I giggled at that.
That was a good one.
I think something that I always read the survey for is like, I want to write the best code, like at the code language level. And the features section does a really good job of outlining, especially if you look year from year or year to year, like the next like buzzwordy thing of like how to write the best code. So like you can see, I think Nullish Coalescing had like a massive jump in like usage and popularity, or like progressive web apps like went way up, WebAssembly even, right? Like some of these things that you hear a lot about, like really have optional chaining, like is basically at 91%, right? Like I looked at that and was like, okay, good thing I'm using that. But I think if you're talking about like looking at things I'm interested in looking at for the next year, it's all of the things that have like low usage but are growing still. So I'm like, okay, I need to look at like string prototype and like all of these like promises and make sure that like I'm using those in my code. So I think there's like some cool like code level feature stuff.
Yeah, I think I'll agree with you in that I think this chart is probably one of my favorites in the whole survey. I love to see where these fall, and I'm always very interested in ones that are kind of here in this like very high satisfaction, but still a relatively low user count. It feels like we get a little peek at what could be the next hot thing. We get to kind of have a little crystal ball. It won't all pan out, but it's neat to see.
It's also the densest area in that graph by far.
Yeah, definitely this side. I think you got to kind of almost, at least for me, I like to separate that into almost two sections, into a right-hand and a left-hand side, because there's a lot, I think, of, these ones that have a very high satisfaction and a very low user count just have like a strong, excited, small user base, and that's awesome. And it's cool to see, but the ones that most interest me are these ones that are creeping up in user count and still maintaining that relatively high satisfaction.
By the way, you can zoom in. You can click on the chart to zoom in. I don't know if it's obvious. Probably not.
I wish I'd known that.
I don't think many people know this because it's not clear at all. But
you should have seen me trying to highlight on each one of these little tiny dots not zoomed in last week when I was showing it to somebody else. This is a brutal thing to find out live.
Sorry.
No, I'm glad. But yes, this side, which again, right, you get like storybook view, roll up, spin around for a minute, but still very good. But yeah, those I find those very interesting personally.
I want this, but for the features tab of, again, like at a more code level, like, okay, so we're all writing like maybe Vue and Svelte and all these things, but like at the code level what is in that space, because it is a really interesting space of like what is growing in adoption and keeping its satisfaction like relatively stable. Like that's fascinating. And that's also, I guarantee you, like I know Mark has a bunch of videos about like literally all of those things in that feature section that have grown. And like that is what tech YouTube is. So if you're looking to hit them early, that's the chart for you.
There is like it's not quite the same, but there's like the circle chart, like the one you can rank it by satisfaction, or not satisfaction, but usage and awareness. Yeah. So
yeah, I do like these, right? And you get that the ones that have the big discrepancy can kind of give you that same feeling.
Yeah, yeah.
I want to be sensitive of everybody's time today. I know I've already gone over 15 minutes, but I promised you all. So if there's any other thoughts that someone has about the survey in general, or really any point that we hit on, it's just now or never, darlings.
Thank you so much for hosting us.
Yeah, I am just flattered that you all came on and shared your thoughts with us. And so much love from the chat. Yes, it was a really, really good discussion. I appreciate you all. And Sasha, I appreciate you and your team so much for the work that you do. And that's all I have to say. I appreciate you all. I'm going to load up the raid. Thank you, everybody. And we'll see you next time. We'll see you for the next one, 2022.
Thank you all. Bye.
Thanks, everybody. Bye.